Today we brought up the quadratic equation thing. Remember that? So let's write down the little formula again. Do you remember it off the top of your head or not? Ax squared plus bx plus c. It's as easy as a, b, c, isn't it? Okay? So you have an x squared and an x. Now yesterday we didn't have that x in here, did we? We just had like something x squared. So let's review quickly what we did yesterday. We had something like this. We had, let's just start off real easy. Oops, what did I do that for? So we had like x squared equals 36. Same problem we did yesterday, right? So what do? Take the square root of both sides. If we take the square root, I can just get rid of it here. I don't really have to show the square root. But I do take the square root of this side. What do I put in front of it? Plus or minus. Very good. So x is plus or minus 6. Very good. All right, what if we had this? What if we had like 3x squared equals 5? Then what would we do? We didn't do one like this yesterday, did we? Do we want a square root first? We do? Yeah, let's get rid of the 3 first, because if we square root, I'm going to have to take the square root of 3. Now, you could do that. Technically, yes, you could do that, but you got to take the square root of 3 as well, and then you got to get rid of a square root of 3. That's kind of a pain. It'll work, all right, but it's kind of a pain. So the first thing I would do is divide by 3. All right, so that cancels out. So x squared equals 5 over 3. Now what do? Square root both sides. So that goes away. That's a square root, plus or minus. Now, if we want to be real picky about this, which I might be, what do we have to do here? Square root of 5 over what? Square root of 3. Can I leave it like that?
No.
No. So what do? Multiply by square root of 3. It's not a conjugate, is it? Because it's just a plain old square root of 3. And then I do the same for the top. And then, so I got plus or minus square root of what? 15 over 3. Wow. Look at that. So that's what x would equal. Okay? So that means what? That means if I took this and squared it, what would I get? I would get 5/3, right? Because that's what x is. Or I'm sorry, if I squared it and multiplied by 3, I would get 5/3. All right, that's good enough. Let's do what we're going to do today. Bless you. What did you notice about those that we just did? It had an x squared, didn't it? But it didn't have what? That bx, did it? Now, I didn't put a plus c, but we could have done that. Let's just do one real quick. Like if I had like x squared minus 5 equals, let's just say 0. This is kind of like this, isn't it?
Yeah,
do you agree?
The b,
yeah. So what would the b be?
0?
In this? Yeah, it'd be 0. It'd be 0x, wouldn't it? Okay, so this kind of does fit this form. Would you agree? What was that other one we did? We did like x squared equals 7.
Oh,
This kind of is in this form, isn't it? How would I write it so it would fit this form right here? I would write x squared. What's the b? Plus 0x. What's the c?
7.
Is it 7? It's minus 7. Why? Because we need it on the left-hand side, don't we? We need to set everything equal to 0. So I want this right side to be 0. So what do I do with the 7? Move it over to the left-hand side and set it equal to 0. Would you agree that this and this are exactly the same thing? Yeah. Okay. Or they, the value is exactly the same. All right. We just wrote it differently. We wrote it so it looks like a quadratic equation. Make sense? All right. So if I wanted to list, and we'll do this probably on another lesson, not today, but this will just be a little bit of sneak preview here. What if I wanted to list the a, b, and c? What would the a be equal to on this? Is it x squared?
1.
Right. It's a 1. Because look, this a is being multiplied by x squared. So what's being multiplied by x squared here?
1.
It's a 1. So a is 1. What is the b?
0.
It's 0 because it's 0 times x. And what is the c? It's negative 7. Do you agree with that? That's going to help you in another part of it. Remember yesterday we talked about the quadratic formula. We're not going to teach quadratic formula today, but another day, maybe tomorrow, I'm not sure. Depends how far we get today. We'll talk about that. And it's kind of nice to know which one is your a, your b, and your c. All right, enough of that. Let's do a little background right here. I want us to establish like a little pattern here, okay? And let's see what I want to do. All right, let's do this. Let's do a couple things and establish a little pattern. Let's see what happens. Watch. Let's write this down, and we're going to do this. You're wondering, why am I doing this? Because it doesn't even look like quadratic, but it kind of does.
write it out, it does.
Write it out. What does that mean, write it out? Go x plus 3 times x plus 3. Remember, the big mistake, and as many times as I've said that, rewind the tape, and you can literally rewind the tape, can't you? Watch the videos if you wanted to. And you could edit it down, and I could tell you how I could, or you could see how many times that I said you cannot distribute an exponent, right? This is not, everybody listening? This is not x squared plus 9. Everybody see that? I've said it many, many times, haven't I? Do you recall me saying that? Making a big deal about it? Lots of times. But still, every once in a while we'll have something like that on a quiz. Still, I have people wanting to do that. Even after I told you many, many times not to do that. People still want to do it.
I'm wondering
All right?
how many times you've said that this year.
17, I think. I've been keeping count. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I have no look on your face. All right, I have no idea how many times, but I've said it many, many times. I know. All right, so let's take a look. Let's figure out what this actually is. So it's going to be, we do FOIL, right? So it's x squared plus 3x, which is plus 6x, and then plus 3 times 3, which is plus 9. Okay, so that's what that is. Let's do, watch this. Instead of writing this out, I did that one time just to make sure you know how we got this. But how did we get that middle term? What did we do to the 3 and the 3 to get that middle term?
Add them.
Okay, you added them, or you could take that 3 and multiply by 2. Agreed? So this middle term is this one, because I'm squaring it, so these two end terms are going to be exactly the same. If I just take them and add them up, like you said, or just take one of those and multiply by 2, which is doing the same thing, you get that middle term. Agreed? So that's a big hint to what we're going to do here. What if I did this? What if I said x minus 5 squared? Let's do this without doing this whole FOIL thing. Let's see if we can do this in our head. So what's it going to be if I FOIL this? X squared. Now how do I get that middle term? What do I do to that number to get the middle term? Multiply by 2. That's right. So what's this going to be? Minus 10x. And then that last one, plus 25. Agreed.
Remember, if it's negative times negative equals positive.
That's correct. Yep, so look, all of these, if it's a squared, every single one of these last terms, what's the sign going to be on every single one of these last terms? It's going to be positive, because look, a positive squared is positive, isn't it? A negative squared is what? No, a negative squared is positive. So look at this last term. I could keep doing this all day. What's that last term always going to be? It's always going to be positive, right? What about the middle term? What's that middle term always going to be? It's always going to be what? Now, the term. I'm sorry, I said term. I meant sign. Sorry. I was thinking sign, I said term. The sign, the middle sign right here. What's the sign always going to be?
The same.
It's going to be the same as this. Everybody see that? See, this was plus, this was plus, this was minus, this was minus. You got it? Let's see what else we could think of. Now, again, what did we do to that 3 to get the middle one? We doubled it, didn't we? What did we do to that 3 to get the last term? We squared it, right? Multiplied by itself. We squared it. Look at another, let's do another one. Just x, we'll do another plus. X plus, I don't know, 6. Okay. And square. We can do that pretty quick. What's this going to be? X squared plus 12x plus 36. Pretty easy now, isn't it? Once you see that pattern established in a little bit. Let's do another one. This will be the last one. X minus, what number haven't we used? Let's go 4 squared. So let's do that. I'm just trying to establish a little pattern here. I just want you to see that this happens every single time. So I wanted to do more than just 2 of them. So this is going to be what? X squared minus 8x and then plus 16. Pretty nice and easy, isn't it? Okay. So what I want you to do now, you saw that pattern already. Look at that 3. What'd you do to get the middle term? You doubled it, didn't you? All right. Does that work with every single one of these? Yep. Doubled that, doubled that, doubled that. Yep. Works. What about the last one? How'd you get the last one? Squared it, didn't you? 3 squared is 9, 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36, 4 squared is 16. So yeah, that works too. I want you to see another pattern. Go ahead, Ashley.
Is it always going to be like positive? The C value, is that always going to be positive?
It will. And the reason is because if you square a positive, it's always going to be positive, right? If you square a negative, right, it's always positive because negative times negative is always positive. So it doesn't matter. If you're squaring a sign, it doesn't matter what the sign is, it's always going to be positive. Make sense? All right. Now right here, I don't think we're going to do the I right now. Let's take a look at another pattern. I want you to see this. I want you to look at this 6. And I want you to figure out how in the world did you get 9 from that 6. Now watch. You did the same exact thing with the 10 and the 25. You did the same exact thing. It's a pattern. You're doing the same steps. Step or steps. Okay? That 8. You did. I'll give you a hint. There's 2 steps. To get from 6 to 9, to get from 10 to 25, to get from 12 to 36, and to get from 8 to 16.
2 square root of c.
Well, just what did you do to that 6? You did 2 steps. Divided by 2. Okay, but that's not that, because if I divide that by 2, I get what? I get 3. Is that a 3? No. What if I divide this by 2? What do I get? A 5. That's not a 5. Divide this by 2, I get a 6. That's not 6. But what did I do? I'm doing that to give you a hint to see the next step. You're right. I do divide by 2, but then I do what to it after I divide it by 2? And I didn't just double it. I squared it. That's right. I squared it. So look at it. Does that work every single time? Did I just pick numbers that happen to come out that way? No. I could have picked any numbers in here that I wanted to, and it's going to work every single time. That's why I picked 4 of them, just so that you could believe this happens every time, not just once or twice, okay? So if I take half of this, half of the middle one, okay, if I take half of that, that's 3, and I square it, that's 9. It works, doesn't it? Look at this one. What if I take half of this one? That's 5, and I square it, and what do I get? 25. Half of this one is 6. If I square it, I get 36. You follow the pattern? Okay, if I take half of this, that's 4, and if I square 4, I get 16. So what if I did this? Let's do another one. What if I didn't tell you this part of it right here? What if I just said, fill in the blank? And they're all perfect squares, aren't they? You see it? Every one of these are a perfect square. So this is a perfect square, but I want you to fill in the blank. Boom. Okay, fill in that blank right there. And it's a perfect square. And let's do this. It's a perfect square. Let's figure out what the perfect square is just by this information right here. Okay, this is a perfect square. So how do I figure out what that last term is going to be? Take the middle one, divide it by 2, which is 8, and then I do what to it? Then I double, or no, I don't double it. So you almost got me. I square it. You take half of it, because if I took half of it and then doubled it, then I got the same exact number that I started with, right? So if I take half of it and then square it, that's going to be this last term right here. Okay, so half of this is 8. 8 squared is 64. So I filled in the blank. What's my perfect square going to be if I had this? It's going to be x plus what? 8. That's right, because if I take 8 and double it, I get 16. If I take 8 and square it, I get 64. Everybody see that? That's what we're really getting at. The whole follow the pattern kind of thing all boiled down to this thing right here. Let's do another one, okay? Let's do another perfect square. We'll put a minus. And then squared equals x squared plus, let's go 20. Oh, sorry. Yep. Minus. Let's say 20x and then plus. Then I'll leave this blank right here. I'm doing this for a reason, okay? We're leading up to something, okay? This is not just what we're doing. This is leading us up to get somewhere. So what am I going to do right here to this to find this last term? This is a perfect square, okay? I want to make this a perfect square. So what does this last term have to be in order for this to be a perfect square? Well, what do I do to that middle term? Divided by 2, which is 10, and then what do I do with that 10? I square it. What is 10 squared?
100.
It's 100. Very good. So now, what did I just do? I made that into a perfect square. Everybody see that? I made that into a perfect square. So what's my perfect square going to be? X minus 10. And how did you know it was 10? Well, if I take this, if I go backwards, I just take the square root of this, don't I? To get that. Does that make sense? Okay. With that said, let's try one of these problems. You ready? Now this is what you're going to actually be doing. All right, so keep all that stuff in mind. All that stuff that we led up to this point is going to be used on this particular problem. And let me find a good one. Here's a good one. Yep. X squared. Let's see. Do I want to do this one? Yeah. hold on, let me see if I want to do that one or not. All right, let's go ahead and do this example. X squared minus, minus 4x and equals 8. First thing we want to do is we want to make this look like a quadratic equation. Do you remember what the quadratic equation? This is probably, what, the third time today I've written this? Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So what I want to make my little equation right here look like this as close as possible. All right, so how would I write that then? I'd write x squared, right, minus. So that's good so far, isn't it? But I don't want it to equal 8. I want this to equal 0. So what do I do with that 8? Minus it, put it on the left-hand side. So I put minus 8 equals 0. Everybody with me so far? All right, so all these quadratic equations always equal 0. And that's what I'm going to do. We good so far? All right. So let's see what we can do. Can we just factor this? Do you remember doing this? Remember doing factoring? Can we just factor this? Don't write anything down just yet. Just let's think. Can we factor this? Is there something times something that equals negative 8 and adds up to be negative 4? Well, I got 8 and 1. That's not going to give me this, is it? I've got, what, 2 and 4. Is there any way I can get a 2 and a 4 to add up or subtract to become a negative 4? There's not. Is there anything else? No, there's nothing. So this is not a nice factoring problem, is it? All right, so I cannot factor it. So I need another way to do it, and that's the way that I just showed you. You know how I filled in the blank? I completed this, didn't I? Okay, I completed this equation to make a perfect square. Everybody hear me on that? I completed this equation, right? I filled in the blank, right? I made it complete to make this into a perfect square. So we call this, we give this a name, and they give it a name for a certain reason. We call this whole process completing the square. Remember doing this in Algebra 2? This is an Algebra 2 topic. Alright, it's called completing the square. Alright, so what we're going to do is this. It doesn't factor, so I'm going to get rid of those little parentheses right here. And it's going to seem like what I'm doing right here is kind of dumb because I already moved this to the left-hand side. But look, this does not make this into a perfect square, does it? What if I took half of this? If I took half of this, it's what? 2. And if I squared it, that's what? 4. Is that a 4 right there? So is this a perfect square? No. So what I'm going to do is I want to make this into a perfect square. I want to force it to be a perfect square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this negative 8, I'm going to chuck it back on the other side. Okay? At first, I like to set it equal to 0, look at it, but in this particular case, it's not going to work out. So this negative 8, I'm going to toss it over to the other side. But I'm going to leave this blank right here. You know how I left the blanks on the other ones? Remember that? See right here, I put a blank and I put a blank. I'm going to do the same exact thing with this. So watch. So x squared minus 4x. Now remember what that last term is always going to be? The sign of it? It's always going to be plus. And I'm going to leave this blank. And I want to set this equal to what? Not to 0, because I take this 8 and got to stick it to the other side. Why did I leave this blank? Because what I want to do is I want to make this into a perfect square. If you remember what we did yesterday, we did several things. You remember one of those problems where we did something like this? Remember that? Okay, this was a perfect square, wasn't it? So how did I get rid of the square? Take the square root, then add a 2, then I'm done. So we're going to use that as well. We're going to use the stuff that we learned yesterday as well to solve this thing. So in order to make this a perfect square, how do we do that? We went through that whole series of steps before, didn't we? So what do I do to that middle term? I take that middle term and I do what to it? Divide it by 2. And let's go off to the side so you remember the steps. So I take that middle term. I don't care if it's negative or positive because this last term is always going to be positive, so I don't really care. Let's just take that middle number, divide it by 2, and then do what to it? Square it. That's right. So what's 4 divided by 2? It's 2, and if I square it, I get 4. So that's going to be a 4 right there. Look what I just did. I made that into a perfect square, didn't I? So the stuff we did earlier, see that? That was a blank before, wasn't it? I filled it in. I completed it. I completed this thing in order to make it a perfect square. I took this. I filled in the blank. I completed it to make it a perfect square. I'm doing the same thing down here, aren't I? So I just take this, I complete it, and make it a perfect square. Now, let's think about this for a second. Remember in algebra, whatever you do, finish this. Whatever you do to one side, you have to what? Do to the other side. So what did I just do right here? I just stuck a plus 4 right here. So this equation that I have right here, right now as it sits, is not equal to this equation. It's not the same thing, is it? So I can't just stick a plus 4 here. But let's think of algebra. If I do that to the left side, talk to me. I got to do it to the right side. So what am I going to do over here? I'm going to add a 4 as well. So really, I didn't really change the value of it, did I? If I add a 4 to one side and add a 4 to the other side, it's still going to be equal to each other. It's still going to be the same. It's still in balance, isn't it? Does it make sense? All right, so I added a 4 to the left side. I'm going to have to do the same thing to the other side. Why? Because that's what my rule of algebra says. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. Now, what did I do to this? I took half of this and squared it in order to make this a what? Come on, I've said it several times today. In order to make it a perfect square, right? This is a perfect square, isn't it? Right? I figured what that is to make it a perfect square. I figured out what this was to make this into a perfect square. So what did I do right here? I put a number here to make this into a what? Perfect square. All right? So let's figure out what it's going to be. What is this going to be as a perfect square? It's going to be x, and then what? Minus, and then how do I figure out what that is? It's a 2. Okay? Do you see why we're doing all that stuff earlier? Because it all comes into play here. Equals what? 8 plus 4. It's 12. Now look at this problem. See this problem right here? This problem right here is what we did yesterday, right? We a couple times, I think. At least once. We did it once today, though, didn't we? Where did I do that? Did I do that up here? Did I erase it? I think I erased it. Okay. But anyway, this is now what we did yesterday. So this step right here is kind of old now. Not that old. It's just yesterday old, right? So now we can do this. What's our first step in order to get x by itself? Get rid of the squared, right? By doing what? Square root it. So if I square root this side, I got to square root this side. What do I put in front of the square root? Plus or minus. Good. All right, so let's write it down. So x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 12. We'll simplify the square root of 12 here in a second, okay? It will be, yes. We'll do that in a second, though. Let's get x by itself first, and then we'll simplify the square root, okay? Now, one more step, basically, in order to get x by itself. What is that? Plus 2. That's right. Added 2 to both sides. So I added 2 here, and I added 2 here. So let's see what we get. That cancels out. X equals... Now, I can't add 2 plus 12, can I? Because it's not really a 12, is it? It's a square root of 12. But I can do this. Remember, I like that number out in front. So it's 2 plus or minus. You could write square root of 12, but... Here, off to the side. Let's figure out what the square root of 12 is. Well, it's 4 times 3, isn't it? Okay. And the square root of 4 is 2. And then the square root of 3. So the square root of 12 is 2 square root of 3. So that's how I'm going to write it. And that's the way I want you to write your answer. And there you go. That's the value for x. We actually found a value for x. How many answers did we get? Did we just get one answer? How many answers? 2. Why'd you say 2?
Plus or minus.
Plus or minus. That's right. Because the answer is 2 plus 2 square root of 3, whatever that is. And your answer could also be what? 2 minus 2 square root of 3. So there's actually 2 answers there. We just combined it to make it look like one to make it a little bit easier so we didn't have to write them both. Make sense? So that's completing the square. Hopefully you see how you got all the steps. I could have just sat here and said, okay, this is what you do. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted you to see why you did what we did. Does that help at all? I don't know. Let's do another one. It's always better to do more examples, isn't it? More examples you do, the better it is. That one's too hard. I might put that one off till tomorrow. Let me go to the problems here. Let's get a better one by completing the square. Here we go. Let's go x squared minus 8p plus 15 equals 0. Let's do this one together. All right, then I'll give you one to try on your own. See if you can do it, okay? So here we go. Is this a perfect square right now? No, it's not. Okay, because if I take half of this, that's 4, right? And I square it, that's 16. That's not a 16. So it's not a perfect square as I write it now. I didn't show you how to factor it, did I? And solve for 0. I'm going to have to do that tomorrow. I can't believe that. Let's just do this as a perfect square, okay? This one actually comes out kind of nice. So let's see what happens here. We want to move this over, don't we? because I want to leave it blank because I want to make it into a perfect square. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to chuck it over to the other side. So let's rewrite it. So it's x squared minus 8p plus, what do I put here? A blank. Good. Equals, not 0, but what? Right, minus 15. Good. Minus 15. See that? All right, well, let's do it. Okay, here we go. So now let's fill in the blank. We got to fill in the blank. We got to complete the square, right? That's why they call it completing the square. We have to complete it. So how do we do that? We take half of this. We already talked about that a second ago. We take half of this, which is 4. Okay, if you need to, you can come over off to the side, take half of it, and then do what to it? Square it. So what's half of 8? 4 squared, which is 16. So what's going to go right here? A 16. And it's always going to be positive, isn't it? Because when you square something, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, when you square it's always going to be positive. Now I can't just do that to the left side. Talk to me. Got to do it to the other side, right, to the right side. So I have to add a 16 over here. So if I added a 16 to the left side, I have to add a 16 to the right side. Now look what I did. I made this now into a perfect square. So now I can write this as a perfect square. So how do I write that? Well, put the x first, and then what's my sign going to be? Minus. You always look here, whatever that sign that is, that sign's going to be there. And what's going to go right here? Remember, because what squared is 16? 4 is, right? Everybody see that? Look, that 4 you can get it two ways. You could either take half of the middle one, right? Or you could just take the square root of the end one. It's the same exact number. Equals what? Negative 15 plus 16 is 1.
And if you square root that, that's still going to equal 1.
But it's not just 1, it's plus or minus, right? So watch what we do. Now we add a 4 to both sides. Can you do this part in your head? Add a 4. Let's just write it down. So plus or minus square root of 1 is just plus or minus 1, isn't it? Square root of 1 is 1. Okay, and then what do we do now? Add a 4 to both sides. So x equals plus or minus what? 5. And that's it. It's not some ugly crazy answer on that one. It's a real nice easy answer. I'll show you another way to do this. And I should have shown you that before we completed the square. I don't know if the book did. Maybe I just skipped ahead. I saw completing the square, and that was what was on my mind today. So let's do one that's a little more difficult. I said I was going to give you time to do one by yourself, but I lied. Actually, I just changed my mind. What color haven't we used yet? Let's use this cappuccino. That'll wake you up, right? A little cappuccino in the morning. All right. Let's do another one. Aha. Let's do this one. X squared plus 5x minus 6 equals 0. All right. Is this a perfect square sitting here right now? No, it's not. Okay, so I want to take this minus 6 and I want to chuck it to the other side. So let's do that. So x squared plus 5x plus what? Blank, good, equals 6, positive 6. I added 6 to both sides. Let's fill in the blanks, right? So how do we fill in the blank? Now this one's a little tougher, so bear with me. Write this down so you can go back and study it. What do we have to do to that 5? Well, I don't square it first. Got to divide by 2 first, okay? So you divide by 2. And then you do what? Then you square it. So let's figure out what that is. This doesn't come out as pretty as the other one, does it? All right, so this is what? 25 over 4. And that's your answer. Well, that's not your complete answer. I mean, that's what it is when you fill in the blank. So that's 25 over 4. Well, we can't just do that to the left side. I have to do that to the right side as well. 25 over 4. So let's see what we get. So bring everything down. So well, actually don't bring it down, but now I've made this into a perfect square. Okay, by taking half of this, even though it comes out to a fraction, this is still now a perfect square. So what do I put inside this parentheses? Got an x. What's my sign? Plus, because of this one. And then how do I figure out what this is? I either do what? Take half of the middle one or the square root of this one. It's the same number. So what's that number in here going to be? 5 over 2. Good. See that? That wasn't that bad, was it? This part's probably the worst part. For some reason, people here have a really tough time adding fractions. But let's add these fractions. What do you have to do to add fractions together? Find a common denominator. So 1 times 4, 6 times 4. What's 6 times 4? 24. And then I didn't have to do anything to that. That's just 25. So what does that thing come out to be? 40 what? 49 over 4, right? That's actually kind of nice, 49 over 4, because what's my next step going to be? Square root both sides. Do you see that? So that is kind of nice, 49 over 4, isn't it? So square root, put a plus or minus in front of it. Let's see what we get. We get x equals, what are we going to do to this 5 halves? It's plus 5 halves. How do we get rid of something that's being added? We subtract 5 halves. So I'm going to put minus 5 halves, plus or minus. Now let's figure out what this is. What's the square root of 49 and what's the square root of 4? 7 what? Over 2. And you can leave your answer just like that. Okay? Yeah, I would just leave it just like that, to tell you the truth. Nah, let's not leave it like that. There's a better way. We can make this look a little bit better. So what is this? Remember the plus or minus? So watch, it's negative 5 plus 7 over 2, isn't it? And it's also, right, or it's what? Negative 5 minus 7 over 2. Because this does simplify. What's negative 5 plus 7? 2. What's 2 over 2? It's 1. What's this? That's negative 12. What's negative 12 over 2? Negative 6. So that's a better way to write the answer. I know I went through kind of quick because time's running out a little bit, but it is recorded. All right. Listen, I challenge you to go and watch the video and go step by step. Sit there and pause it and then try the next step. Watch what I do, pause it again, try the next step. That's what you need to do. There's several steps to this, aren't there? Okay? I mean, it's not like you just do 1 or 2 things and you're done. You got to do like 4 or 5 or 6 things. So I want you to make sure that you take your time with this. Watch the video, but watch it the right way, and then work on these problems. Let me give you a worksheet, and then you can go.